Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're shifting focus from the usual story of the Western Front. We're heading east.
That's right, to a battle that honestly changed the course of World War I almost overnight.
We're talking about the Battle of Gorlice-Tarnów, May 1915. A massive breakthrough.
And it was, a real gamble by the Central Powers. High stakes. They needed to shore up a front that was really starting to crumble.
And for Russia.
A disaster. One of their worst defeats of the war, really. It gave Germany and Austria-Hungary this huge immediate success. Critical, even if maybe not decisive in the long run.
So our mission today is to get into the details.
Yeah.
What pressures led to this? Why was there such a technological gap? And crucially, what was the human cost of it all?
Exactly. Why does this victory sometimes get lost in the narrative, and what went so wrong for the Russians?
Okay, let's unpack this. Before Gorlice-Tarnów kicked off the Eastern Front, it wasn't quite the trench warfare stalemate of the West, was it? More fluid, but still a huge mess.
A massive mess, yeah. But incredibly brittle, especially for Austria-Hungary heading into 1915.
Brittle how? They'd stopped the initial Russian advance, the famous steamroller, hadn't they? Tannenberg and all that.
They had, yes, but at a tremendous cost. Austria-Hungary, particularly, had taken horrific losses in the Carpathian Mountains during the winter. It wasn't just losing ground, it felt existential.
Existential, you mean like collapse?
There was genuine fear, that the Russians could break right through into the Hungarian plains. Budapest itself felt threatened. It was that serious.
Wow. Okay, so Austria-Hungary is teetering. And wasn't Italy about to jump into the war on the other side?
Exactly. That was looming large. So stabilizing the East right then was absolutely vital just to keep Austria-Hungary in the fight.
But what about Germany? Their high command, the OHL under Falkenhayn, their eyes were mostly on France, right?
Primarily, yes. Falkenhayn wasn't necessarily looking for a war-winning blow against Russia in 1915. His main goal was defensive, in a way.
Defensive? How so?
He needed to create a deep buffer zone in the east, push the Russians back far enough so he could safely pull German troops out and send them west. The Schlieffen plan hadn't worked, so the west was still the priority. Securing the east was a means to that end.
Right. And this led to some disagreement within the German command.
Yeah.
About how to do it.
Oh, definitely. You had Hindenburg and Ludendorff, the heroes of Tannenberg. They favored this huge, sweeping encirclement of Russian forces in Poland. A really ambitious plan.
But Falkenhayn and the Austrian chief of staff, Hutzendorf, they balked at that.
They did. They thought the grand encirclement needed too many troops they couldn't spare from the west, so they opted for something different.
Which I guess
a much more focused central breakthrough. A sharp punch right near Gorlice and Tarnów in Galicia. Falkenhayn insisted it be under German command, too.
So bring in German leadership and German troops.
Yes. Specifically, the newly formed German 11th Army under General von Mackensen. A concentration of force aimed like a spearhead.
So the Central Powers are putting a lot of chips on this one. Focused strike. Mackensen's got about 216,000 men ready. But the Russians are there, dug in. Did Mackensen have the surprise he needed?
Well, it's interesting. The surprise wasn't so much about stealth, like sneaking up unnoticed. It was about the sheer, overwhelming power they unleashed. It was a technological shockwave, really.
Kicking off on May 1st, 1915, with artillery.
Oh, yes. A massive, day-long bombardment. Sources describe it as the heaviest concentration of artillery fire seen anywhere in the war up to that point. It must have been apocalyptic.
Could you give us a sense of that concentration?
It was incredibly dense. Think about it. One heavy gun every 130 meters, a field gun every 40 meters, plus mortars. Mackensen's army alone brought over 600 guns to bear on this narrow sector.
And the Russians, what do they have facing that?
In that same sector, maybe 4 heavy guns total. The difference in firepower was just staggering. And the Germans even brought in aircraft, a dedicated squadron for spotting.
Wow. And did the landscape itself play a part?
It absolutely did. The ground actually sloped downwards towards the Russian lines,
giving the German and Austrian artillery observers perfect visibility.
Perfect visibility. While their own assembly areas were mostly hidden from the Russians, it was a huge advantage.
So the Russians were exposed with inferior firepower.
Yeah.
What were their defenses actually like?
Critically weak, often just 3 lines of trenches, not very deep, with poor barbed wire. They just weren't built to withstand that kind of pounding from heavy guns.
They were equipped more for a war of movement, weren't they?
Yeah.
Light field guns, mostly.
Exactly. A fatal mismatch for the kind of battle Mackensen was bringing.
So, May 2nd. The bombardment lifts, the infantry goes over the top. What did they find? What was that like for the soldiers?
Reports say the Prussian Guard Corps actually got into their jump-off positions, very close to the Russian lines, completely unnoticed before dawn.
Incredible.
And when the assault started around 10 a.m., they found the Russian trenches. Well, desolate is the word used, just pulverized, filled with corpses from the shelling.
So the lines just broke instantly.
Almost instantly. The attackers pushed forward about 6 kilometers very quickly, and actually with relatively light initial losses for themselves.
And by the end of that first day?
By evening, some units were 14 kilometers deep, and they had captured around 17,000 Russian soldiers. Just like that, the Russian Third Army's front was shattered.
An incredible initial success. 17,000 prisoners in a day? The momentum is totally with Mackensen. But this is the Eastern Front. Vast space. Can they keep this up? Or can Russia somehow recover?
Yeah, this is where it gets really dramatic, isn't it? The physical breakthrough is one thing, but it sounds like it triggered a complete psychological collapse, too.
It did. By May 3rd, the gap in the Russian lines was 35 kilometers wide. Mackensen was achieving exactly what he intended, driving a wedge deep into the Russian formations.
And the retreat must have been chaotic.
Utterly chaotic, because, and this was a critical failure, the Russians had no prepared defensive lines further back to fall back to.
Nothing. No backup trenches. Essentially, no. So the retreating soldiers were forced out into the open fields, freeze-felled, the sources call it, completely exposed.
Exposed to artillery and aircraft.
Constantly harassed by both, which just drove the prisoner numbers up and up. The commander on the spot, General Dmitry, knew he was facing a catastrophe. He tried counterattacking, but he just didn't have the troops.
And reinforcements were slow coming.
Very slow. Russia's railway network in Galicia wasn't great, but then things got even worse because of decisions made higher up.
The Russian high command. Stavka.
Yes, Stavka. They made a decision that seems, well, militarily disastrous in hindsight. They actually forbade a general retreat until May 10th.
Forbade it, even as the front was collapsing. Why?
Politics, mostly. They were worried about how a major defeat would look to potential allies like Italy and Romania who were still sitting on the fence.
So they sacrificed soldiers to maintain political appearances.
It looks that way. Insisting on holding ground that was clearly lost proved catastrophic for the men under Dmitri's command.
He must have been desperate. Did he try anything else?
One last, desperate counterattack on May 7th. It failed, with huge losses. That was really the breaking point.
The final collapse.
Pretty much. Russian units started getting encircled. Near a place called Dukla, the German and Austrian forces closed a trap. General Kornilov's entire division, the 48th, was forced to surrender.
Kornilov. He becomes famous later, doesn't he?
The very same. But here, he capitulates. Dmitry reportedly told Stavka on May 9th his army had simply lost all its blood. The line just ceased to exist.
Utter disintegration. Something like 210,000 Russian casualties in about a week.
Around that, yeah. Killed, wounded, captured. Finally, on May 10th, Stavka gave the order for a general withdrawal, but the damage was done. Now the question was, how would the Russians try to slow down this relentless advance? And that really brings us to the human cost, doesn't it? Once the military structures break down like that, the price paid by everyone caught up in it is just immense.
The casualty figures alone are staggering. For the Russians, you said over 100,000 killed or wounded?
Yes, and potentially up to 250,000 taken prisoner. So total losses north of 350,000 men, plus huge amounts of equipment, lost guns, machine guns.
And the Central Powers. Their losses were lower, but still significant.
Significantly lower, maybe around 40,000 killed and wounded combined. But we shouldn't gloss over that. For the specific units leading the breakthrough, the fighting was incredibly intense.
Like those German and Austrian regiments you mentioned?
Yeah, some lost a third, even up to half their men in the initial push. It was brutal, concentrated fighting. Victory came at a cost, just a vastly different scale of cost compared to the Russians.
And the state of the Russian troops being sent in as replacements.
Right.
You mentioned they were poorly trained.
Sources describe them as barely trained peasant simpletons, often without proper rifles even, just thrown into the meat grinder against a technologically superior force. It's heartbreaking, really.
And then came the retreat. Stavka finally allows it, but what happens then?
Well, the Russian army adopts a scorched earth policy as they fall back towards the river San.
Scorched earth.
Meaning they destroy everything that might be useful to the advancing enemy. They evacuate civilian populations, forcibly sometimes. They burn villages, kill livestock, tear up railways, roads.
To slow the Germans and Austrians down.
Exactly, make the captured territory useless. But the impact on the civilians living there, in Poland and Galicia, it was devastating. Utterly devastating.
Militarily, though, The Central Powers had achieved their immediate aims.
Oh, absolutely. The whole Carpathian front for the Russians was destabilized. They retook the fortress of Samiro fairly quickly in June.
And Lemberg, the capital of Galicia.
Lemberg fell later that month, too. A huge symbolic victory, especially for Austria-Hungary.
And did this shift things politically within Poland itself?
It did. Groups who were more inclined towards the Central Powers, like Piłsudski's Polish legions fighting alongside the Austrians, they gained influence over the previously stronger pro-Russian groups.
So a huge territorial gain, hundreds of kilometers. The pressure was off Austria-Hungary. Germany had its buffer. But was this the victory? The war-winning one they needed?
Right, that's the big question, isn't it? Gorlice-Tarnów was undeniably a massive tactical and operational success. But what did it actually achieve in the grand scheme of things?
Well, strategically, the immediate outcomes were clear. That buffer zone was created. Russian Poland was eventually occupied.
A buffer hundreds of kilometers deep. It removed any immediate threat to German territory from the east.
And that freed up Falkenhayn.
It did. It gave him the breathing room, the troops, and the confidence to start planning major operations in the west again. Verdun, specifically, would follow.
And Austria-Hungary could pivot south.
They could shift forces to face Italy, which had just joined the Entente. So definite strategic benefits in the short to medium term.
But the battle itself, what lessons did military thinkers take away from it, tactically?
Well, for the Central Powers, it was seen as a triumph of combined arms, using the hard lessons they'd already learned in the West.
Meaning coordinating everything.
Exactly. The sophisticated coordination between massive artillery preparations, infantry assaults, even air observation, all linked by better communications like field telephones. It was a blueprint for how to break trench lines.
And on the Russian side, the lessons were...
Well, failures.
Multiple failures, yeah. Lack of air reconnaissance, ignoring intelligence warnings about the buildup. These were bad enough, but command decisions were arguably worse.
Like General Dmitry not preparing fallback positions.
That was absolutely critical. His belief in holding the front line at all costs, seeing rear defenses as defeatist, it meant when the line broke, there was nothing behind it. Instant collapse onto open ground.
Compounding their already dire supply situation.
Right. Not enough shells, not enough heavy guns for this kind of warfare, not even enough rifles for the reinforcements. Just a cascade of problems.
It's been called Germany's greatest victory of the war by some historians.
It has. Historian Herfried Münkler uses that phrase. The sheer scale of the advance and the captures was remarkable.
But there's criticism, too, that it wasn't decisive enough. Yes. Others, like Wilhelm Groner later, pointed out that while the map looked impressive, this huge bulge, or sack as they called it, it didn't actually trap and destroy the Russian armies completely.
They couldn't close the sack.
They couldn't achieve that full operational encirclement. The Russians, despite catastrophic losses, eventually managed to withdraw and reform a line further back. The knockout blow didn't land.
So a monumental breakthrough, huge human cost, a masterclass in tactics for its time. But ultimately, not the end of the war in the East.
Not at all. It highlights, I think, the enduring importance of logistics, of sound command, even over sheer numbers. You can win a massive battle, inflict hundreds of thousands of casualties, but if you can't translate that into a strategic endpoint, well, the war just goes on.
A sobering lesson. Gorlice-Tarnów created the buffer, shifted resources, but the larger conflict ground on. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much is a tactical victory worth if the ultimate goal, ending the war, stays elusive? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring history.